Thank you, Jake. I'm going to go ahead and call this November 7th, 2022 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks for those that are attending in person. We are also meeting remotely via WebEx, so welcome to those that are participating remotely as well. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Chris, do you mind leading us tonight? Thank you, Chris. For the record, I would just like to formally excuse Councilors Sweeney and Norton from the meeting this evening, and I believe they'll join us at our November 21st meeting here in 2 weeks. With that said, we'll move on to a proclamation this evening, the Children's Grief Awareness Day, which is, we are going to acknowledge that holiday on November 17th, 2022, and I'll read that proclamation now. Whereas 46,000 Montana youth will experience the death of a parent or a sibling before their 25th birthday. And whereas many individuals feel misunderstood in the wake of loss, thinking that their grief is invisible to those around them, and whereas all bereaved youth need advocates, supporting them as they navigate a world without their person, and whereas effective grief support can help mitigate possible negative outcomes by fostering positive coping mechanisms and resiliency. And whereas recognizing this month serves to build a foundation of support for grieving youth, strengthening a national community of bereaved individuals, support service organizations, and community members. And whereas our community, Whitefish, is committed to supporting one another, working to raise awareness of children's grief and ensure that no child grieves alone. Now, therefore, I, John Mulfeld, Mayor of the City of Whitefish, Montana, do hereby proclaim November 17th, 2022 as Children's Grief Awareness Day. Thanks very much for listening this evening. We'll move on to communications from the public. We do have, let's see, 3 public hearings scheduled for this evening. If you're here to speak to those hearings, wait until I call those individual hearings, please. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to our attention, now would be your opportunity. Name and address for the record, please. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead. You have on your agenda the action on the tax increment financing. And no, am I calling that the right thing? The
impact fees?
Impact fees,
yeah.
Excuse me,
yeah,
thank
that's
you.
That's okay.
And I note that those bringing that before you are recommending that you include transportation impact fees. And I just want to strongly support that need clearly when the transportation plan was adopted, we realized that there's a lot of need unfunded in the city. And I think impact fees are one strategy to begin to address that. And I think there's a menu of strategies, but I want to support that effort on your part. Excuse me. You also have in your packet a letter that I submitted, and that comes up later for discussion. I will be here to answer questions, assuming the meeting doesn't run too late. But I did want to encourage you to look at ways that you can serve the walk-in public that wants to look at a file and to not necessarily copy it, doesn't even know what to ask for in terms of a request for public information using one of your written forms, but wants to just simply look at files. And as you know, the work I do throughout the county and the 3 cities, I regularly go in and request documents and regularly have access to them. I think Whitefish could do more to improve public access and staff awareness of where that material is located to provide it when requested. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Appreciate the comments tonight. Further public comment this evening?
Shane Axholm, 811 Railway Street, the long-suffering Railway Street. When you tried to put in this affordable housing development at Moldown, What was the reason that you didn't put it in there? What were the stated reasons?
I'm sorry, I don't know what project you're referring to. And
Well, hold on.
typically this isn't a question and answer session.
Okay,
But
well-
we'll certainly take your comments and we may address them at the end of the meeting.
Okay, well, as I understand it, the stated reason was because it would negatively affect everyone's property values over there. And now you're trying to do it to our neighborhood. It would destroy our property values and destroy the views that we have from our homes of the Whitefish Range and create a traffic nightmare over there. So I don't know why it's even being considered. It's inside the safety region of the railroad tracks, which runs along both sides of the railroad tracks for the length of the yard. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.
Ryan Dye. I live on 510 West 4th Street. I just wanted to speak briefly about item 8B. And I'm really, I guess, say Captain Obvious here. I'm really happy to see that 8B is being considered. I live very close to that road, use Caro Avenue often, and I think it has become a very dangerous road. I guess even before the increase in traffic in Whitefish, I've been there 17 years, so even before the growth that we've seen in Whitefish recently, I think it makes sense to tie things together a little better with that stretch of Caro. I would love to see it widened. I would love to see sidewalks to increase pedestrian traffic. It would tie, Grouse Mountain to 2nd Street, and it just makes sense. There's two big projects, I think, that are just getting underway. The Idaho Timber site and right by there. It's just really become dangerous to pull out, well, certainly to walk on Caro or even attempt that now. And I've heard the construction vehicles traffic has increased greatly. It's basically used as a bypass. I've heard compression brakes used, between 7th down going north to 2nd. So really glad to see that. Just wanted to speak in support of that item. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the comments this evening. Chris.
Good evening. My name is Chris Schustrom. My address is 504 Spokane Avenue. I'm pleased to speak to you this evening on behalf of Whitefish Shines, the all-volunteer community effort to decorate our fair city for the winter season each year. This is the 72nd year or so that tradition's been carried on. And I wanted to let the council and everyone in attendance, the city staff and the public in city council TV land, know that we'll be hanging the winter decorations on Sunday, November 20th. Community volunteers are very welcome and should meet at the corner of 3rd and Central at 8 a.m. And I also wanted to thank the city, in particular Craig and Bridger and Maria and the Parks Department for their continued great partnership in helping this project to continue as it has. So thanks.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks. And that's 8 a.m.? Okay, thanks. Nathan.
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue, president of Shelter WF. I'll speak in that capacity right now. Anyway, totally would love to see the snow lot affordable homes happen. Want to reassure Shane and people that kind of have this erroneous line of thought that from the research that we have, and this is a 2021 study, that here's the quote: homes located within a typical block of affordable housing developments saw property values increase on average by a small but still significant 0.9%. So Shane left, but his property values are safe.
Thank you, Nathan. Further public comment tonight? Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. Item 6, you have the minutes from our regular meeting on October 17th. Motion for approval.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, Michelle, which brings us on to our first public hearing of the evening, which is item 7A, consideration of a request from MH Legacy LLC for a conditional use permit to construct a multifamily commercial mixed-use building with 4 dwelling units located at 220 2nd Street East, and the property is zone WB3, which is our general business district. Evening.
So MH Legacy LLC is requesting a conditional use permit in the WB3 zone for a multifamily dwelling, 4 exactly. And the reason they need a conditional use permit is you need one for greater than 3 units. And again, this is at 220 East 2nd Street. Currently there's a tattoo parlor located there, and so the existing land use is commercial. Adjacent land uses are residential and mixed use. They're all in the WB3 zone. The site, it's located on 2 lots. The growth policy designation is core commercial for the WB3 zone, which is also characterized by mixed use and multi-use developments such as residential above retail, which is what's being proposed. Public notice was sent out to adjacent landowners 300 feet of the subject parcel on September 26th, as well as a notice posted in the Whitefish pilot on October 5th. And I have not received any public comment since the report is made or since the planning board meeting. So the proposal is in compliance with the growth policy designation of core commercial because it is mixed use with commercial on the bottom floor. As far as compliance with regulations, all setbacks, parking, and height requirements are met and will be confirmed at the time of building permit. As far as they're planning to build above the 35 feet, which requires that additional 20-foot setback from the street, and that will again be confirmed at time of building permit. So they're meeting all the requirements as far as zoning. There's adequate usable land area for the project at 0.124 acres. There's not any intended impact as far as emergency services goes. There's traffic circulation. It'll be accessed on 2nd Street, and there's currently an alleyway to the north that'll serve the site as well, access into the garage. There's no negative community impact as far as noise, dust. Hours of operation will be consistent with commercial uses. And so, so it's recommended, staff recommends, the Whitefish Planning Board recommended approval, subject to some of the following conditions. Specifically, the alley to the north of property must be paved 16 feet wide, as the alley to the west of it has also been paved to that width. They must obtain approval for the widening of the paved travel surface along the northern alley from the Public Works Department. Specifically, they'll need to include a full fire suppression system as required by the fire marshal, such as additionally a Knox box will be required. And then another special condition, as their 2 contiguous lots are being developed as one project, the interior lot line must be abandoned prior to the issuance of any building permit. And again, the Whitefish Planning Board met on October 20th and approved the request unanimously.
Thanks, Nelson. Any questions for Nelson on his staff report? We'll start with Giuseppe.
Just one question, Nelson. I read in the packet that the planning board approves subject to the 12 conditions of approvals that you guys, the staff, put down, but they amended the number 4 one.
Correct.
So, so right now, we're looking at either the staff's condition of approval and/or the planning board, including the amended number 4. Am I correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Steve?
Just a quick question. Condition number 5 reads that recycling must be approved by Public Works and North Valley Refuse. Should that be Republic Services? No?
Republic Services actually does business as North Valley Refuse,
Oh,
so it is
okay.
confusing because we reference Republic Services, but they are the same company still.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Nelson? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on this agenda item, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Kate, do you have anything additional to add this evening?
Good evening, Kate Walker, Northwest Design Studio. I do not have anything in addition to Nelson's rundown of the project. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Doug Pepmeyer with TD&H is here as well if you have any engineering questions for this project.
Thanks, Kate. Any questions for Kate or the applicant, or Doug for that matter? Thanks, Kate. We'll call on you if anything arises. Is there any public comment this evening on this item? Rhonda?
Good evening, Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Ave. I don't have any objection to this project because it obviously fits within the guidelines provided by the city. But I do think that going forward, we should recognize that this is a commercial use. This isn't residential. These are short-term rentals. And throughout the documents, it refers to the residents and so on. And I think we need to kind of get a grip on what we're actually building here in Whitefish and not kid ourselves. Call a spade, and that would involve working through a lot of our regulations so that clearly what you're approving is for short-term rentals tonight with a commercial space on the ground floor. And I think we should just all acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public comments? How about online, Michelle? Not seeing any additional public comment, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Giuseppe?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve WCUP 24-24 and the findings of fact in the staff report and the 12 conditions of approval as recommended and amended by the Whitefish Planning Board on October 20th, 2022.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. We'll move on to item 7B, which will be ordinance number 22-16. Just a reminder to the council, since this is an ordinance, it will require a supermajority vote of the council. So this evening, that would mean all 4 of you voting in the affirmative. With that said, we'll go ahead with ordinance 22-16, an ordinance amending Whitefish City Code to add Article Y, Chapter 2, Title 11 to establish the WBT zoning district, which is our business transitional district, as an implementation of the Highway 93 South corridor plan, and this will be on a first reading. Dave.
Hi, good evening. Not going to necessarily go into all the detail on this because this is the 4th public hearing we've had on this, and we also had 4 city council work sessions on this. But as a refresher, we did adopt the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan back in the beginning of this year in January, and it called for the creation of a highway transitional zoning district to the area just south of Highway 40 that the county had over the last couple of years zoned to B4, which is their equivalent to our WB2 secondary business district zoning. And the purpose of that is to ensure that properties at the entrance of Whitefish that annex into the city in the future are developed in a manner consistent with the community's vision for that area and to better buffer adjacent residential properties from negative impacts. It would apply to annexed areas currently zoned by the county as secondary business district, and any traffic intensive uses would be moved from the permitted to conditional uses. That was the intent of the 93 plan. Over the course of going through the planning board and the multiple work sessions with the council, there was a lot of modifications that were done to remove a lot of the different uses that may have been previously permitted by the county. In the first go-around, they may have been in the conditional uses, but now a lot of those uses have been removed. Under the county B4 right now, there's 34 uses that are permitted by right, and I'm just gonna go through the ones that are no longer permitted, either conditionally or just as a permitted use, that are currently allowed there with the zoning that's in place in the county. And they include amusement parks or zoos, antique stores, auction barns, automobile, boat, and recreational vehicle parts, sales, rentals, repair, and service, gas stations and convenience stores, bars and lounges, beauty salons, boat and recreational vehicle storage, bowling alleys, building supply outlets, casinos, convenience stores, farm and garden supply stores, banks, furniture stores, grocery stores, heavy equipment stores, rentals and service, hotels, motels, appliance and electronics stores, machinery and equipment rental, sales and repair, military surplus stores, mini storage, private postal services, formula restaurants, gas stations or service stations, short-term rental housing's permitted there currently, it wouldn't be. Theaters, truck stops are currently allowed in that zoning district in the county that it is right now, and wholesale and warehousing. And so the intent that came out of the Highway 93 corridor plan and from the steering committee that worked through that plan was that we would create a zoning district that would allow enough uses that would entice people to still want to annex into the city, but eliminate those uses that we felt like would either have a high traffic count. That's an area that just because of the highway access and the limited connections to the highway there just is not conducive to high vehicle trip types of uses. And we'd much rather see the types of uses that would be either destination oriented or potentially some mixed use things. And so the types of uses that would be permitted in this zoning district would be things like light assembly, medical clinics, nurseries and landscape materials, professional offices, gyms and recreational facilities, or single family through multifamily dwellings, and maybe veterinary offices. But other than that, those are the only permitted uses in this transitional zone. And then under the conditional uses, there's some additional things like hospitals, animal kennels, recreational guides and outfitters, research laboratories, RV parks, and then multifamily dwellings over 18 units, which would be 19 or more, and then restaurants would be a conditional use permit. And so a lot of those uses that were allowed in the county have been eliminated out of this zone, but a few uses remain in there that would potentially entice people to annex into that zoning district, because the whole point would be if we can get them on our sewer and water, we can at least have some control over what happens there. They'd also be subject to our architectural review standards, our dark skies ordinance, our sign code, all those things that we do in the city, building permits that wouldn't be required in the county, also including our environmental regulations and setbacks off of intermittent streams and wetlands and things like that, which there are some of those located in that county B4 zoning district currently. Through the process of going through this, we did add additional setbacks off the highway that would be required in this zoning district. So currently, there really is a 20-foot setback in the B2, and the county has some minimal setbacks, but this zoning district would have a 30-foot front setback and a 50-foot landscape buffer when abutting Highway 93 and Highway 40 on the front, and on the side, a 20-foot landscape buffer when abutting residential or agricultural properties, and a 50-foot landscape buffer when abutting Highway 93 or Highway 40. And then in the rear, 20-foot landscape buffer when abutting residential or agricultural zone properties. And then there's also some requirements that shared driveway access or frontage roads would be required where possible. So there'd be internal circulation patterns. The site design would incorporate shared parking and landscape buffers to protect surrounding properties from adverse impacts. And then any kind of exposed utilities or storage would have to be screened in that zoning district. And then at the last work session, you guys discussed the bulk and scale standards. Basically, currently in the WB2 zoning district, which is our closest equivalent to that county B4, we require a conditional use permit for buildings 10,000 square feet and above. In this zoning district, 7,500 square feet. Any building that was above that would require a conditional use permit. And then we added language in here, at Councilor Fury's suggestion, that a maximum building footprint of 15,000 square feet. So no building over 15,000 square feet would be allowed to be built in this zoning district. They'd have to break it up into smaller buildings that would be more conducive to that area. And I provided a list in the staff report, which the staff report's on page 124 of your packet, of some of the buildings in town that are similar to that 15,000 square foot threshold. For instance, the Glacier Medical Building is about 14,000 square feet. Walgreens is about 13,500 square feet. The Pin and Q Building is a little over 20, almost 21,000 square feet. Nelson's Hardware, about 12,400. Hampton Inn is a little over 15,000 square feet. So just some different examples of what that threshold would be in there with that. And again, you guys had talked about residential uses in that zone. And currently this transitional zone would be more permissive than the WB2 with regard to residential uses, especially multifamily. Currently in the B2 zone, it's a conditional use permit, administrative conditional use permit up to 18 units, and then 19 or more is a full conditional use permit. And again, as I mentioned, as this is drafted right now, the single family through 18 units would be a use by right, and then over 18 units would be a full conditional use permit. So that basically kind of sums up the overview of that zoning district. You know, we do review all these things according to the code. You know, it does meet our requirements of it being consistent with our growth policy. We did talk about our corridors being efficient and visually attractive in the original 2007 growth policy. And as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of information in our recently adopted Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, which is adopted as part of our growth policy, which calls for the creation of this transitional zoning district, much as it's drafted here. There's goals and objectives within that policy that talk about, you know, discouraging land uses out in that area that are inconsistent with our vision, discouraging commercial uses with large volumes of vehicle trips, which this zoning district would do, protects the rural character and agricultural uses, and also provides additional setbacks as part of this. And so, in essence, the creation of this will implement our growth policy, and it's one of the implementation items of that 93 corridor plan is creating this. There's some other standards when you do adopt zoning, is it consider reasonable provision of light and air, and again, the highway setback requirements. Residential buffering will ensure some of that will be in place. Our existing zoning codes, which would be in effect. If we did, were able to annex those properties, we will have building permit standards in there. We review those things currently. There is no building permit required for any construction out there because it's in the county. As far as motorized or non-motorized transportation systems, again, one of the things we'd be looking at is requiring frontage and backage roads, consolidating accesses on the highway, limiting the types of uses that would have a lot of vehicle trips coming in and out of there, trying to cross 5 lanes of traffic. Potentially looking at trying to, you know, direct traffic down to where there is a signal at Highway 40, and potentially, you know, other areas where there's intersections, such as Blanchard Lake Road, rather than having them coming in and out of that, in between that stretch where everyone's still going 65 miles an hour. So in general, that kind of covers most of the stuff. We've kind of gone over some of this before. We did have a public hearing with this code before the Whitefish Planning Board. It was, you know, quite a while ago when that happened. There has been a few changes since then, but the Planning Board did recommend approval. At that time, there wasn't anybody that submitted public comments. After that, we did receive several comments, two comments from Citizens for a Better Flathead, and then about 11 property owners or various citizens around the valley did send in comments. And then we had also a letter from attorneys representing the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association that all had some concerns about the zoning district. I think there were several new emails that might have come in today that Michelle will probably put on your desk. But staff does recommend approval of this new zoning district. We think there's a lot of compelling reasons to adopt it. I mean, it will inhibit the spread of WB2 zoning south of Highway 40. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to adopt this, because the equivalent to B4 is our B2. That's what we put on Town Pump when they annexed in. This zoning, I think, would be much better suited south of 40 than our B2 zoning district. Again, the list of permitted uses in the county under B4 is very long, contains a lot of uses that are unattractive and could cause significant traffic issues. We've also talked to property owners or potential developers that have basically said if we can't get water and sewer, then we'll probably just do self-storage on some of those sites. I don't think that's the best solution necessarily either. And then we would have much more robust protections of those existing neighborhoods, such as Emerald Heights, with greater landscape buffers, protecting them from any kind of uses that might occur on there. And then, the best reason is it gives you guys the oversight of what happens there if there's a conditional use permit or a PUD that comes in place. The city gets to decide rather than just getting built without much oversight under the county zoning.
Thanks for the staff report, Dave. We'll start with questions on Dave's staff report. Any questions from the council? Steve?
I just have one question, Dave. If somebody comes in with a permitted use out there, how do we require that they start to or otherwise provide us with a frontage road or a shared driveway if it's a permitted use?
When a building permit's submitted, we review it for all the zoning requirements, setbacks, all the other things that are required. It has to go to ARC review. We have architectural review standards. Through both of those processes, we have an opportunity. It talks about, where possible, there might be situations where two lots just don't connect, or the topography-wise, it just doesn't make it, work out. But we would at least require them to either dedicate an easement or some other thing to make that potentially possible.
And you can do that if it's a permitted use, which would be a use by right?
It talks about shared driveway access or frontage roads, whether public or private, are required. I think that gives us enough language. Angie can weigh in, even if it's, it's not a discretionary permit, but it's in our zoning code. And if there's opportunity there, we're going to try to make sure that that happens as much as we possibly can. I can't guarantee that every circumstance that we'll be able to do it, but that's our intent.
I get that. I just don't see how we can force them to. I mean, that's one of my biggest concerns out there is putting more access onto Highway 93.
Yeah,
so
I think that's everyone's access, and the state's getting ready to do an access control study in the near future that's going to look in more detail about that. But I mean, right now it's all a free for all. I do think there's opportunities, especially that B4. They're mostly pretty large properties currently.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't been subdivided yet. If they do subdivide, they're going to have to go through our subdivision process where we're going to have an opportunity to make sure they do that stuff.
It's all county, so
Yep.
So if they subdivide before they come to us for annexation, then we don't have any control over that, do we?
True, no, we don't. But there is some language in that highway overlay zone that the county adopted that also talks about frontage roads. So there may be some opportunity for us to at least weigh in that department with the county to try to get them to make sure that happens. But that's going to be up to the county commissioners.
Okay. Angie, could you answer my question about our ability to force shared driveways or frontage roads, backage roads on a permitted use? Is there anything in our code that allows, if it's a permitted use, that allows us to force that?
I don't think unless they're gonna subdivide or do a PUD overlay or conditional use permit, I don't think we can force them to do that.
Okay. All right. That's my only question. Thank you.
Ben?
Good question, Steve. I was going to ask some of those same questions myself. I was going to ask if the transportation plan should show frontage road on it or something like that, or make it a condition of the annexation, or some other way to help guide the transportation development in that area.
I mean, I think that's something that, when Craig weigh in too, but when the county did add that zoning district in there, I mean, that was something that we tried to work with them on to show a location where a frontage road might go. They just kind of drew a line on the map without looking at the topography or the land ownership or anything, mostly on the west side. So yeah, I mean, I think that, there's opportunity to do that, but it's really going to take as those properties develop, how they do that. I know there's some groundwater issues that might preclude subdivision until they get on water and sewer from the city, so.
Yeah, the transportation plan didn't go into detail. Am I on here?
There you go.
As far as that corridor south of Highway 40, but we did anticipate in the transportation plan the access management work that MDT is just starting right now that includes everything from essentially Highway 2 into and through Whitefish all the way to 93 West. So I think that's coming shortly, and I anticipate that we're going to see frontage and backage roads come up in that plan.
How long out is that plan?
I would imagine we'd see a draft of that in the next year, likely 18 months till adoption, though.
I mean, is there anything worth considering for us to do? I don't know if it's transportation plan or annexation policy or something to, I don't know, just help, as Steve said, help the development that happens here, guide it in that direction.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much we can do from a transportation plan without reopening that document and doing an amendment. You know, that's a possibility, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily binding on future development. I mean, it would obviously show our intent and our desire to see frontage roads, but I think that we can express that, you know, obviously through conversations like this and through, well, really, it's going to come down to, you know, some type of discretionary permitting. I don't know, I'm stuck.
I think we can also work on our annexation plan. I mean, we've been working on it for quite a while. We just had a little bit of a turnover. And working on some conditional annexations and working on like conditions of people annexing in, so.
Okay, thank you. I had one other question too, if you don't mind. Dave, I was contrasting in my head the difference between this zone and the R4 residential zone. And I couldn't remember, does R4 have the density, maximum density standard in it, or is that part of the PUD?
So yeah, the R4 does, with the PUD, it has a maximum density. It also has a maximum density based on, because you can only have so many units per square footage that are built into that.
In the zoning or in the PUD?
It's in the zoning chapter.
Yeah.
You basically, with the R4, you get, you know, the first 7,000 square feet for one unit, then 1,000 square feet for each additional unit is the density requirement in the R4 zone.
Sure.
I mean, it just depends on how many square feet you have, how many units you can build, right? And,
yep.
But like the B2 doesn't have that same density requirement for residential, but with a PUD, there is a maximum density in the B2. We haven't added, you know, because the stone doesn't exist, so we haven't added this into the PUD chapter to set a maximum density. It's, you know, really going to be based on what they can build in the parking, and, you know, anything over 18 is going to require a conditional use permit, so it's got to, you know, work because it's going to be discretionary.
Yeah. I mean, would it be accurate to describe this as the highest density residential zoning district in town, effectively?
No, I don't. I mean, it's just similar to the WB2 district. It's just, in that district, it's an administrative conditional use permit for multifamily, unless it's over ground floor commercial, which then it'd be a use by right, or 100% deed restricted for affordable housing. In the B2, that's a use by right. It's unlimited if you're building affordable housing units.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what's your opinion as a planner about the role of that level of high-density housing in that area?
You know, it's not necessarily the ideal spot to put highest density uses. I think, you know, mixed use might be appropriate out there. It is, you know, land that's available that could have housing, which we have a shortage of. And so it's one of those things where you're weighing, okay, this is, you know, generally you want to put your highest density closest to downtown, close to your urban areas, places where people can walk and bike and kids can walk to school and do all those things, and you can get to services easily. You know, putting them out on the fringes of town is never the most ideal way to plan. On the flip side, our community's growing. It's not that far from things like Montera, other areas where we have attached housing, you know, just on the other side of the hospital. So that whole area does have similar types of uses, not that far away. And I do think if there, if it's a mixed-use environment where you might have a little grocery store or a restaurant or a coffee shop or something like that, it would enable people to be able to get their, necessary services without necessarily having to go into town and saving vehicle trips. So it really depends on how it's developed, I guess, and what the overall plan is.
Thank you.
Giuseppe?
I have a follow-up question to Councilman Davis. You were trying to compare WBT as written to WB2. Am I not correct, though, that WB2 allows short-term rental, where WBT doesn't?
No, the existing B4 in the county does allow short-term rental housing, but the B2 does not allow short-term rentals in our zoning code. At one point it did, and so some developments were, like the Eagle Lake, were developed with that, but then we changed the code, so it's not allowed there.
Thank you.
Further questions for Dave on his staff report? I just had a couple questions, Dave. Just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on the setbacks and the landscaping buffering requirements, both for when a development abuts 93 and 40 as well as a residential neighborhood. I was driving again to Kalispell today and just noticed the creativity that went into the Silverbrook and the Ford dealership, setbacks and greenscapes. Could you just, so you indicated in your staff report that there's a requirement for a 30-foot setback, correct, along 93 and 40?
So it's actually a 50-foot setback, where anything would abut 93 and 40 would be a 50-foot setback. And it's also one of the widest spots of, highway right-of-way of anywhere.
I thought you referenced a 30-foot setback.
Yeah, that's just a normal, so,
Let me finish my comment. I thought you referenced a 30-foot setback and then an additional 50-foot landscaping buffer. Is that correct?
No, so it's any normal setback would be 30 feet if it's a front, if it's off of a new frontage road or whatever, but if it abuts 93 or Highway 40, then it would be a 50-foot landscape buffer when it abuts one of those roads.
And what's allowed in that landscape buffer besides just vegetation and signage, or is signage not allowed?
I think signage would probably be allowed. I mean, we do have signage setbacks off the highway at certain distances and things that are in our sign code. But yeah, I mean, we require, like if it's a ground-mounted sign, that it has to be landscaped around the sign and it can't be internally illuminated and all that stuff. But I think a sign would probably be able to be allowed in that buffer. Just no parking lots or buildings. It'd have to be landscaped.
And then you mentioned a 25-foot landscape buffer abutting residential uses, correct? So, for example, Emerald Heights.
So it would be a 20-foot landscape buffer when abutting residential, for Emerald Heights, apart from any other requirements. So if they have a parking lot, we do have requirements that if you're putting a parking lot in, that there's a landscape buffer addition to that. But yeah,
that seems like a very narrow buffer to me when we're trying to protect existing residential neighborhoods adjacent to high-density commercial and residential uses.
I mean, it could be increased. I mean, in the B2 zone, we don't even have setbacks or buffers adjacent to anything behind them. So, I mean, it's unique to this zone is adding that additional buffer. But yeah, I mean, certainly could increase that to 50 feet.
And you indicated the B4 properties are generally obviously large properties. In your opinion, would encumbering these properties with an additional or a wider buffer abutting residential encumber those lots, in your opinion?
I don't think so.
They're wide enough, deep enough?
I think they're wide enough to accommodate that, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Are they
And
wide
it's
enough to accommodate a wider buffer along 93 and 40? I believe the Ford dealership in Silverbrook, I mean, those got to be pushing 150 feet.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, that's one of the widest parts of the right-of-way. So there's big portions of that that are going to be, MDT property, and how that's, landscaped or whatever in that. I know we have sidewalks and landscaping all along Highway 93 South that's all in the MDT right-of-way. And so, I mean, maybe there's typically that's something you have to come to an agreement with MDT and what types of plants and all that stuff that go in there. So, but, I think that there's going to be quite a bit of landscape in addition to that 50-foot setback, just because it's part of that's going to be that MDT right-of-way along there. And hopefully
so the MDT right-of-way does not get counted towards the 50-foot buffer, correct?
Nope, that's got to be on their property.
That's standalone, okay. think that's all I had. Further questions for Dave? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance number 22-33, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public comment this evening?
I really thought there were going to be a lot more people here when I wrote this. I don't know if I would have wrote it otherwise, but Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Going to speak in my capacity as the president of Shelter WF on this one as well for the end of it. So I'll start by saying that I could really care less whether or not you guys pass this tonight, but if you don't, please just consider tabling it for a significantly later time. There are many other things that I think we could be working on with the time that will be saved by not endlessly coming back to this. There are some who've been involved in this discussion that will urge you to just take more time. I would ask you, to what end? What will we gain? Let's be clear about what's happening here, because I think they can be hard to understand for most people. Currently, there's a bunch of county-zone land south of the city that has a variety of uses, some of which a certain portion of the whitefish population might not want to see built, like storage units and amusement parks. Thus, this zoning district is being proposed to pick the uses that you all would like that you all would prefer to see at the entrance to town. The items listed as permitted or conditional uses in the zoning district represent those uses that would benefit from annexation, and are also the uses that the city would prefer to be built on the land or that already exist and are not yet annexed into the city. Things like professional offices and homes. With the exception of housing, no uses are being added that cannot currently be built under the current county zoning. Maybe you don't want to encourage a few things listed on the proposal to be built by using the carrot of annexation. That's fine, but it's time to make a decision. It is not hard for me to imagine why there's a movement to simplify zoning regulations when this is the process that we find ourselves in for something so seemingly simple. Lastly, I want to address the housing component of this proposed zoning district. We need more homes, and we need to build them more densely, but why here and why now? I can't help but view this as a politically expedient move to show action on our housing crisis. There are fewer neighbors to complain at this podium, and it will be easier to approve larger development proposals. Well, in theory, at least. I'm sure that the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association's lawyers will try their best to stop you. I would like to see a lot of housing built here, but probably not for the next 10 or 20 years when we truly need to. When it comes to building housing, the only thing that we lack right now is political will. There's simply too much opportunity to build homes in town that does not exacerbate our traffic problems and the eventual destruction of our climate, nor relegates those with fewer means to the outskirts of town. As Dave mentioned in the staff report, the WB2 is less permissive. I want you all to make some decisions that feel difficult in the moment, but that better serve the needs of all of us, not just those like myself who were fortunate to buy a home in town, or who were born early enough to move here before it was cool. By actively encouraging many homes to be built in this area on the outskirts of town, instead of making the more difficult decision of approving more homes to be built where many homes already exist, like next to my own house, we're simply doing what has been done everywhere else. It's a dead-end path to urban sprawl, highway expansions, loss of farmland and open space, and deadlocked traffic. Soon enough, we'll be Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, or Texas. It's no different from Kalispell, which is also routinely making the easy decision to build apartment homes on farmland far from downtown. You all have the power to do things differently, and I hope that you start taking advantage of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Mary. Thanks.
Good evening again, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 Main Street, Kalispell. We are here again tonight to ask you to table the proposed WBT zoning district before you for a number of specific reasons. The overarching reason for this is tied directly to the Einstein quote that I begin these comments with, and that is, the world we have created today as a result of our thinking thus far has problems which cannot be solved by thinking the way we thought when we created them. In looking at and listening to your questions here tonight, I think there's a real opportunity to take another approach to this corridor, and so that's what I'm going to focus my initial comments on. There are sadly little new strategies or solutions to guide the proposed WBT zoning before you as proposed. To put bluntly, what is being proposed is more of the same way of thinking about zoning as a mere list of uses, be they residential, commercial, or other. Such use-based zoning has not been able to keep pace with the rapid growth Whitefish continues to face. Single reliance on use-based zoning is in a large part the cause, and that's a typo, not the result, of the failures of the city faces in growing traffic congestion and perceived real loss of community character. Congestion is created in a large part by the demand of a long list of potential uses that the Whitefish zoning code currently allows as a driving factor for how the city is growing, as opposed to the form-based zoning to define the character of development the city residents desire. To some extent, no matter what use, and the capacity of the infrastructure to serve that proposed site. We used use-based zoning, which is a list of permitted conditional uses. We would suggest results in growth more dictated by what the developer envisions that the city residents than what the city residents envision. Form-based or character or infrastructure capacity zoning will ideally provide, we think, more predictable development criteria and a better shared vision of how Whitefish will grow. And given the questions you raised this evening just now, I think it will address many of those as well. You have the ripe opportunity to rethink the WBT zoning and how Whitefish does zoning and annexation. We believe this can best be accomplished by contracting for some fresh input from planners who have expertise in numerous communities around the Northwest to help Whitefish adopt a new model zoning code for the proposed WBT zoning district. When we reference new model zoning, we are referring specifically to adapting what is known more commonly today as form-based zoning codes and/or multiple layers of zoning, where the most important layer of zoning becomes the base layer form, determined by starting with and identifying the infrastructure and site capacity for roads and active pedestrian and transit, as well as the desired visual impact that landscaping and setbacks provide. A form-based code, in response to the question that was asked about how do you require frontage roads, how do you ensure that what's in a buffer, all of that would be defined as part of your zoning code under a form-based zone. And so it allows much more predictability, and it removes the focus from looking at what the use is to looking at how do you, whatever the use, get the form and the design that reflects the kind of growth and the kind of viewshed that the community wants. As an overlay on top of this zone, you can then identify the viability and capacity of a given site for specific uses, be they residential or commercial or other, and can best be addressed, we would suggest, by requiring a planned unit development specifically with additional criteria for this proposed WBT Highway Corridor District. I would also add that I think it's really important that you consider tabling this tonight without the added annexation standards in front of you. I think your annexation has to be really hand in hand with this zone, because this zone really gets implemented by your decision on annexation. The 2007 Growth Policy Implementation Section and subsequent updates, like in 2009, have called for and prioritized the adoption of what at that time was called character-based standards for neighborhood conservation districts. As we understand, this character-based zoning concept, in consultation with some other professional planners, this form-based zoning codes are the more sophisticated and current tool that is being used to capture this character-based zoning that the growth policy references. Using relatively small acreage included in the WBT zoning district, the city has a real opportunity to relatively easily use this district as a test case to see if form-based zoning is a tool that could be implemented more broadly as the city moves forward with the comprehensive update of the Whitefish growth policy. We would note that neighboring Missoula, as well as other areas, Bozeman, for one, in the state, have opted to write a form-based code. They did it recently for a new neighborhood plan. This form-based code opens up the possibility for well-integrated mixed-use zoning that allows for limited neighborhood commercial and mixed residential uses while preserving the image and character of a space. It also delineates requirement for uses like parks, playgrounds, open space for the 4 quadrants of this neighborhood plan they did. In addition, these open space requirements, the plan incentivizes agricultural preservation, a goal ultimately tied to the rural character sought after in the Highway 93 corridor. We would also note that Missoula was able to attract federal funding in the BUILD grant based largely on their innovative use of this form-based zoning. And I have provided you a link to that, and it's easily lookable. You can look up more about this zone on the Missoula website. If we haven't enticed you yet to take time to really look at the form-based zoning as a viable alternative to the use-based zoning before you tonight, we ask you to consider some of our prior comments. The recent site plan for the property at the intersection of Highway 93 and 40 crossing the town pump, attached to our comments, which aren't attached to what I just handed out, provides yet another proposal reason why the zoning is inadequate under the WBT. And I believe you were all sent this site plan as part of my request for that as a public information. If not, I really encourage you to look at it.
Mary, you're about 8 minutes into your delivery and about a third of the way through the memo that you handed us this evening. If you don't mind, if you could expedite the last 4 pages, just in the spirit of keeping our meeting efficient, please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The site plan below, let's see. So the questions that were raised about the setbacks, looking at this site plan, it looks like parking is allowed within the setback. I think relying on highway right-of-way as part of the potential for additional buffering just can't be relied on with the growth that the city is facing. While this site plan suggests that it's clearly identifying transportation or solving transportation issues, with this site plan. It's not. I went and visited with MDOT about this particular site plan, and they confirmed that none of these accesses have been verified as even viable, that it's a really complex intersection to come forward. And I raise this as if you merely require a site plan without form-based zoning upon annexation, you could get a plan like this and not have any idea that there is no current easement identified for the private road, that these accesses aren't yet approved, that there's no identified setback for future improvements like a roundabout at this site. So all of these are really important. Again, I want to summarize that it's really important. I've listed the types of uses included in this new zone that are not defined in the code. And that leaves it open to interpretation by the zoning administrator that I think is going to lead to future conflict. These really need to be defined and tied down. On the issue of subdividing, again, before comes into the city, or the inability to require frontage roads, again, form-based code, as I understand it, has the tools to use this. I think it's really time that the city step back, bring in some fresh perspective. It may even buy the opportunity to showcase the city for a build grant or some of the federal funding that's coming available. I think this is a critical intersection that deserves our best thinking and our best new ideas, and I hope you will consider these points. There are certainly a number of other points I won't go into, but I hope you read those. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. Who's next? Rhonda.
Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. So I attended, I think all, or almost all of the meetings for the Highway 93 South Corridor and all the public events. And the public was pretty clear that this is the gateway, or they perceive that it should become the gateway to Whitefish in the future, and that this intersection is an incredibly important piece in what happens to it. They were appalled that all the trees had been cut down by the boat lot, et cetera. I don't think that what is being proposed here is what they had in mind. I have just returned with my family from a trip to Atlanta, Georgia, and up into the mountains north of that area. And we observed that wherever two roads cross, there is exactly what goes on all over America. You've got a bunch of little strip mall things and a big something like a Walgreens, and then some other kinds of little restaurants, and the ins and outs are almost impossible. It's hard to get into them, it's hard to get out of them, and you have no idea where you are except in some overdeveloped part of America. And I think that what we're looking at tonight would just give us that kind of intersection as the entrance to our town, and I think we just need to be more creative. There is existing several single-family neighborhoods in that vicinity where people really love where they live, and also some more dense housing at Montera, for instance. But there's Emerald Heights, Great Northern Heights. There are 4 or 5, the Lakes, Montera. And I think that the best thing that we could probably hope to get from this offering would be some single to multifamily development of homes. I think the commercial, this idea of neighborhood serving commercial, is a figment of your imagination. And restaurants, for instance, are huge traffic generators. They draw tons of cars to them, need lots of parking, and that is not what would be what you want to see at this entrance into our community. So this site plan, which I had an opportunity to look at briefly, obviously a developer his vision for this property or this neighborhood is quite different than what the people who live in Whitefish would have for a vision for it. And I think that the future of this area should be driven by the community's vision. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public testimony this evening on this item? Further public comment? Michelle, anyone online this evening? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Giuseppe?
Mr. Mayor, 3 times a charm. I move to approve WZTA 22-01, the findings of fact in Exhibit B and the language in Exhibit A as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board on January 20, 2022, and further amended and refined by the City Council and staff.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion? And the motion does fail for lack of a second. We'll try again here. I think this is a matter of significant importance to this city, and certainly a decision that's going to weigh heavily on all 6 of you, myself included. And given the fact that we have 2 counselors absent tonight, I would certainly entertain a motion to postpone to the November 21st meeting, if that's okay with the council.
Mr. Mayor, I move to postpone to October 20.
November 21st?
November 21st meeting.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion?
Second it.
Yes.
Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? And I assume that we will leave the public hearing closed or open, Giuseppe?
Does he want to talk first on the further?
Steve, excuse me. Okay, is that okay with the first? That we leave the public hearing closed, Giuseppe? Okay. Further discussion on the motion? All those, Giuseppe?
I had some further discussion on the motion, which is the motion to postpone. I just wanted to comment that this is not an expedient move. The staff was directed to work on this a year ago. So right now, it might be felt as an expedient move, and we're postponing it to get more time to it. I also love Einstein. I studied it. I read all his books, some in original language. He was an amazing theoretical physicist. He had a PhD from Zurich, Switzerland, big city, not a tourist town, and he was not a city planner. Thank you.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. We will move on to item 7C of our agenda, which will be Resolution 22-34, if I'm not mistaken, a resolution establishing the Employee Parking Permit Program and related fees. And I'll turn it over to Michelle Hauk for the presentation.
Good evening. So, as we all know, parking has been an issue, especially for downtown business owners and employees. In 2019, the City Council adopted the Whitefish Parking Management Plan to establish sustainable parking in the city of Whitefish. The Parking Permit Implementation Committee was appointed to create a pilot program for downtown business owners and employees to be able to park all day to alleviate the need to move their vehicles, to avoid parking citations, and to ensure that on-street parking in front of businesses is available for customers. The parking pilot program was first implemented to run July 1st, 2021 through August 31st, 2021. The program was a success and was extended to run from January 2022 through December 2022. The cost of the program was $20 a month per license plate per permit. A limited number of permits of 85 were made available in the downtown surface lots and on the 3rd level of the Whitefish downtown parking structure. The public time limited parking continued to be available in the surface lots. The committee's term sunset October 31st, 2022. During their last meeting on October 4th, the committee discussed recommending to the City Council implementation of the Downtown Employee Parking Program. Permits will be available to purchase through the online portal on the City of Whitefish website. The cost of the permits will continue to be $20 per month per license plate per permit, with a 5% discount for 12-month purchase. The committee recommended to increase the number of permits to 100 permits to accommodate for future growth of the downtown core. The permits will be available Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. The program will allow for the permit holder to park in the following lots: East 3rd Street and Central Avenue, East 1st Street and Spokane Avenue, directly south of the Whitefish Community Library, the western portion of that lot, and also on the 3rd floor of the City Hall parking structure as shown in Exhibit A. The committee also recommended that the City Council direct staff to survey permit holders annually to improve the program and to create a committee to further implement the parking management plan. There is no financial requirements or impacts to the city associated with the downtown employee parking program, and staff respectfully requests that the City Council approve resolution number 22-34, establishing the employee parking permit program and related fees. I want to thank the Parking Permit Implementation Committee, which is Chris Schustrom, Chair, Jeremy Grossman, Josh Brandstetter, Mike Rossi, Leslie Hunt, Tyler Fury, and Giuseppe Caltabiano for their time on this implementation program. I am available for any questions.
Thanks, Michelle. Any questions for Michelle on her staff report or the resolution? Ben?
Just curious, Michelle, how many of the 85 permits were used, or all of them?
Pretty much 90% of them were used.
Wow.
That's a pretty good number. So anybody that wanted one could get one, but we used all that was there, basically?
So currently, right now, I think we're sitting at really close to 83 or 84 permits for the month of November.
Great. And is there any available information about how often the permits themselves were utilized?
We try to collect that through our parking buggy, but between the time limit that information is out there, we weren't able to really collect all that information.
Gotcha. But anecdotally, did it seem useful to the employees?
Yes, I think so. You know, we did the parking data count, and though we find that the 3rd and Central parking lot is the one that's used mostly, a lot of permit holders, I think, were moving closer to like the outskirts to where it was unlimited parking rather than finding another location in one of the other lots. So though they don't want to walk, they tend to walk anyway. But we do find that the 3rd level of the parking structure still is not being utilized.
Thank you.
Further questions for Michelle? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be our own resolution 22-34. Is there any public testimony this evening? Nathan.
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This program is misguided and is a regressive tax on our workers and residents who can least afford it. You might say, well, it's just $20 a month. What's the big deal? How many of you have to work 1 to 2 hours to earn $20 like many of our downtown workers do? I know I don't. I want to be clear that I'm not deriding the committee that worked hard on this program. Free parking, for business patrons at least, is baked into our society. Downtown workers should be required to have a parking pass to park in dedicated lots, but these passes should be free. According to the recently updated housing needs assessment, 3,500 people commute to Whitefish to work every day. 3,500. Many of these workers who are not currently able to access housing in Whitefish are already paying a tax to drive here. We're asking them to pay an additional tax to park, to make money, to pay their rent, to pay for their gas. So what's the solution? The people coming downtown and monopolizing the parking spaces should pay to do so. Locals can be exempted for the purpose of running errands by simply allowing the first 30 minutes of parking to be free to everyone. I think there's some historical context here making things difficult. Downtown Whitefish used to have parking meters. They aren't there anymore, so I'm guessing that it didn't work at that time. Downtown business owners concerned about having less business needn't be concerned. They're wrong. They're more than likely losing business with the current system of free parking, particularly when town is busy. If people can't find a place to park, they'll just go elsewhere. Paid parking frees up parking spots more frequently. But what about when it's slow in town? This is an instance where technological advancements are amazing. We could use a demand system that only charges for parking when the spots are filled to a critical mass and need some help to open up. Not busy downtown, like right now, it's not busy, then the parking's free. Whitefish wants to be a walking and biking town, but we should put some thought into our agency in creating car dependency. Free downtown parking is a big part of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Further public comment this evening? Michelle, how about anyone online? Nope. We go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, please. Steve.
I move that we approve Resolution 22-34, resolution to, see if I can get all my P's together here. Resolution establishing the employee parking permit program and related fees.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Michelle. We'll move on to item 8 of our agenda. We'll start with item 8A, consideration to authorize to proceed with surveying and an engineering RFP or request for proposal for the Riverbend Path project. This appears on page 174 of your packet. Craig.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
Here's a good segue from parking to bicycling and pedestrianing. So I think everybody is aware that the Bike Ped Committee has been working on a conceptual design for the Riverbend Trail. Thanks to Bruce Booty and his generously donated time, we do now have an elevated path design for this important section of the Whitefish River Trail. The elevated path relies on helical piers to extend the 10-foot path over the Whitefish River, utilizing both the 6-foot easement the city holds with Riverbend, as well as moving out into the river. On August 9th, the Park Board of Commissioners unanimously voted to recommend City Council approve this elevated design. Then on September 6th, earlier this year, Council unanimously approved Bruce's path design as recommended by the Park Board. So with the conceptual design approved by Council, staff would like to continue the momentum on this project and move forward with further design. Due to the current uncertainty in budget allocation, it's anticipated that the initial task order will simply include surveying and preliminary engineering. There isn't currently money dedicated to the Riverbend Path project in this fiscal year budget, but staff does believe there could be about $100,000 dedicated from general fund cash reserves. We feel this will be a sufficient allocation to complete the survey work and complete preliminary engineering. Once the project moves into final engineering and construction, we then feel that paved trail impact fees and resort tax monies could potentially be considered to fund the remainder of the project. So as we move forward, we are planning to follow Council's policy on consultant selection. The first task is to nominate a rating panel that should be made up of city staff and other individuals approved by Council. I am recommending that that rating panel include myself, Karin Hilding, and Maria Butts. Then the policy also requires a selection committee to be established that must be comprised of department director, one other staff person, and one elected official. So again, I'm recommending myself, Karin, and Maria, but we will need one council member for the selection panel. So we're just looking to approve that rating panel and hopefully have one council member that would be willing to serve on the selection committee.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? I had a quick question. At this point in the project development phase, do we have any concept on cost for, for construction? I mean, ballpark? No.
I haven't even put a ballpark number to it, you know, with the volatility in construction costs right now and such a dynamic design. I really think we got to get through preliminary engineering to even start throwing potential cost estimates at it. It won't be cheap, though.
No, and my other question is, are we going to be engaging FWP in the Conservation District through the design process?
Yeah, so as we move forward, council really directed staff at this point to accomplish three things. One, to work with Bruce on a pro bono basis on the conceptual design, check. Continue to work with the homeowners association on the easement, which we've been doing, and to continue to work with FWP on the permitting. So we would continue to engage the HOA and FWP as we move forward into this phase. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Craig. Steve, did you have a question?
Just a quick question. I noticed it on the plan, but I just want to confirm that the plan is for a 10-foot wide path, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions for Craig, or can I have a motion, please? We do need to approve the engineering and surveying RFP, as well as make the appointments for the rating panel, as well as the selection panel. I would volunteer, if no one else would like to serve on the selection panel. Steve?
I make a motion to move forward with the RFP for the Riverbend Path project and appoint you as onto the rating panel, or the selection panel.
And then Craig, Karin, and Maria for both the rating panel as well as the selection panel.
So moved.
Thanks, Steve. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous as well, Michelle. We'll move on to item 8B of our agenda, which is consideration of approval of Caro Avenue as the next resort tax roadway project, and authorize Craig to proceed with an engineering request for proposal. Craig.
Okay, more engineering. So I think everybody's aware that we are nearing completion of the Edgewood and Texas reconstruction projects, and so staff is looking for direction on the next roadway project. Past practice has been to select projects in geographical order based on priority, and Armory Road has previously been the project proposed to follow Texas Avenue. However, based on recent transportation and growth trends, council directed staff to consider Caro Avenue during the recent budget work sessions. The Resort Tax Committee did review roadway projects at the last meeting on October 19th, and with the recent completion of the transportation plan, we were able to use the major street network projects from that plan to guide those discussions. The MSN projects, or major street network projects, are really broken into three categories: the mill and overlay, roadway extension, and roadway reconstruction projects. And the way that the resort tax allocation language currently is written, we really had to focus on the reconstruction projects. So it takes all the mill and overlay and the future roadway extension projects from that list out. But it does leave 9 projects. Those are highlighted in the list that's in your packet in red. And the conversation did really kind of revolve around Armory and Caro. To help with the evaluation, I had WGM complete traffic counts on both Armory and Caro back in August. And the results really weren't surprising. Traffic counts, which are enclosed in your packet, showed weekly trips about 35% higher on Caro Avenue, and weekend trips about 138% higher. So definitely more vehicular traffic on Caro than on Armory. We did not count bicyclists or pedestrians, but it's anticipated they follow, pretty similar trends. So at the end of this discussion, the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee did recommend that council proceed with Caro Avenue. Obviously, based on the heavy vehicular traffic, unsuitable roadway conditions, the need for a bike ped connection between 2nd and 7th Street, and the current construction that's happening over in that area of town. So construction on the project would be anticipated to include roadways, storm sewer, and pedestrian improvements. and the engineer that is selected would be responsible for the design of that project. The eventual scope for the consulting engineer will, of course, include surveying, engineering, design, public relations, and construction management. However, we're kind of in a similar circumstance on this project as we were on Riverbend, where we don't really have money budgeted this fiscal year. We have, at this point, $3,010,000 budgeted in resort tax funds, and the estimated cost on this project is about $2.3 million. So the thought would be, finish up with Texas Avenue. We'll see what we have left in the resort tax budget for fiscal year '23, and hopefully we can at least proceed with surveying, preliminary engineering, and begin the community outreach on this project. So similar to what we just talked about, we need to, should council wish to move forward with Caro Avenue as the next project, we'll need to, or council will need to nominate a rating panel as well as a selection committee. So it's recommended that council appoint myself and Karin to serve on the rating panel, and then myself and Karin and one council member to serve on the selection committee.
Thank you, Craig. Questions for Craig? Steve, or a motion?
Well, I guess it's kind of a question and partially a motion. When would the selection panel be meeting? Would it be during business hours?
Typically, it happens during business hours, but we could be flexible. I mean, it's something we could, the selection panel will interview the successful candidates and then make a recommendation to council. So typically, it happens during business hours, but we could do it a weekday evening.
Okay, because I'd be willing to serve on the selection panel, but I have a day job too, so.
Right.
You?
You could do it on a Saturday or Sunday.
I try to. Okay. Well, I'll make a motion then to move forward with the Caro Avenue project, to appoint Craig and Karin to the rating panel, and to appoint myself, Craig, and Karin to the selection panel.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
I second it.
Seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted
Excuse
to
me.
point out, if I read it correctly, that for the time being, the foreseen cost of this project is $2.4 million, and out of the resort tax that we could dedicate to the same project, we have $3 million. So if we continued on this project and nothing changed, we would be in the black for $600,000. To me, that's a no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Craig. We'll move on to item 9, communications from our finance director. I almost said new finance director, but you're not new anymore. Item 9A, review and consideration of the annual 2022 impact fee report. Good evening, Laney.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Council, for your time in reviewing the impact fees at tonight's meeting. I want to thank City Manager Dana Smith and Public Works Director Craig Workman and their support and assistance for my transition into the world of impact fees here at the city, and as well as the Impact Advisory Committee. Jumping right in, we have an impact fee fund which accounts for 5 impact fees imposed by the city: paved rails, park maintenance, emergency services, city hall, and stormwater. There are additional impact fees levied in the water and sewer enterprise funds. As you can see in the staff report provided in your packet, the cash balances for the 5 impact fees in the impact fee fund showed increases ranging from approximately $9,000 to $91,000 depending on the fee. For those listening and not in possession of the report, I wanted to relay that it is the city's policy that revenue generated from impact fees be spent within 5 years or shortly thereafter. This is based on developers paying impact fees to help fund capital projects related directly to their development's increased demand on public facilities, and the prudent practice to expand capacity in a reasonable time frame after the receipt of the impact fees. As noted by the decreases in cash balance for the sewer and water impact fee funds, these fees were tapped in fiscal year 22 for the water treatment plant expansion project and the wastewater treatment plant project in the sewer impact fee fund and the cast iron water main replacement project in the water fund. Revenues for each impact fee are down across the different fees. However, they come in higher than were conservatively budgeted for fiscal year 22. Interest income is also down. However, we expect to see a bump there with interest rates rising in fiscal year 23. The 5% administrative fee that is charged in addition to the impact fees are down commensurately with the fees, and this revenue for the 5 impact fee goes into the general fund, while, like interest, the 5% admin fee stays in the enterprise fund. It is generated in the sewer and water. For expenditures, the impact fee fund projects in fiscal year 22 for which there were expenditures was in the paved trail line item for an engineering on the Armory Park Master Plan in the amount of $4,106. As mentioned previously, extensive outlays were made in the water impact fee fund in the amount of $1.2 million for water treatment plant expansion project, and in the sewer fund in the amount of $849,000 for the wastewater treatment plant project. Looking ahead to fiscal year 23, the remaining $150,000 for the wastewater treatment plant project was budgeted to bring this project to completion. $775,000 has been budgeted for the cast iron water main replacement project, and other projects scheduled for impact fee dollars in fiscal year 23 include $239,500 for the Armory Park Improvement Project Phase 3 and $87,500 for the Whitefish Avenue stormwater upgrades. The Impact Advisory Committee met on October 25th to review this data and asked that staff provide totals across all fees for revenues and expenditures, and that data is now included in the report. The committee has recommended that the council accept this annual report.
Thanks, Laney. Any questions for Laney on her staff reports or the impact fee reports? I have one, please. Page 191 of the PDF packet, just for clarification. I think I know the answer to this, but the table for the impact fee fund 2399, the revenue and interest, that's total collections, not available cash balance, correct?
That's right, it's collections.
Total collections.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where in the report do we have a summary of cash balance?
That's on the first page.
That was on page 1, okay.
190. So the cash balance is in that table.
I'm sorry, that's right there. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Not hearing any questions, I would entertain a motion. Giuseppe.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move to direct the staff to proceed with appointing the consultancy firm as, oh, hold on. It's the input fee, let me find the motion, I apologize.
Yeah, we're on agenda item 9A, Giuseppe. Just adopting the 2022 impact fee report.
Yes, I move to adopt the 2022 finding from the impact fee committee.
Yep. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Michelle? And we'll stay with Lanny and go on to item 9B, consideration of approval to award the impact fee review and update and authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute the contract.
Okay, thank you. The Impact Advisory Committee, the city staff advertised a request for qualifications to update the impact fees, and we received one applicant with their qualifications. Tischler Buys was the name of the applicant. The advisory committee, impact fee Impact Fee Advisory Committee met to interview the applicant, and that was on October 17th. They made a presentation. They also presented a similar study that they had just done for the city of Missoula. The request for qualifications period did not close until October 19th, but we didn't receive any more applicants for the period. And the Impact Fee Advisory Committee agreed that Tischler Buys was going to be sufficient for providing the impact fee study. I think everyone agreed that the presentation was good, and their recommendation is that the council award the impact fee update and review project to Tischler Buys. Their proposal is for $70,190. Our fiscal year 23 budget amount is for $60,000, but staff has reviewed the budget and feels that they can come up with the remaining $10,190 across the funds that would need to come through, like resort tax and stormwater and other places. And so that's the first recommendation. And the second recommendation, during the conversation of the presentation with Tischler Buys, they said that they were capable of looking at a transportation fee, but that was not the original scope of the request for qualifications. But the committee did want to ask the council to provide some consideration to direct staff to amend the contract if necessary, or if we were able to do so.
Yep. Great, thank you. Any questions on the staff report? Or can I have a motion? Excuse me, Ben.
This is a different company that we've hired for this in the past, right?
Correct.
The other company didn't apply at all?
They did reply, but they replied with information that they had staffing shortages, or at least were not able to honor the time frame within which we were hoping to get the study done.
Okay. My other question is with respect to the transportation impact fee. I guess, how does that, are we trying to consider now if that's something we want to do, or is that something we should study and then decide later if we want to add that in there? I mean, how much is it and all that? I mean, I got a lot of questions.
Well, it just kind of came up, I think, during the presentation, because they had the ability to do so. We had just completed the transportation plan, and so I think that's why it came up in conversation. They had done that particular component with the city of Missoula in the study that they had provided as an example. I think that's the other reason it came up. They said that they did have the ability to do that. It would cost $18,000 to $20,000, and so that's why it was considered separately, or it was discussed separately. And I think it was just like a fledgling idea, but at the same time, in conjunction with the transportation plan that was just completed, I think that was piquing the interest of many of the advisory board committee members. They wanted to explore it.
Okay. And this was the recommendation of the advisory board to look at transportation?
Correct.
Okay.
I would entertain a motion. Giuseppe.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve both recommendation number 1 and recommendation number 2, the committee to award the impact fee update and review project to Tischler Buys, and to review the existing impact fee and authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract in an amount not to exceed $70,190, and subsequently to direct the staff to negotiate an amendment to expand the original scope to include a new transportation impact fee.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion?
Yes,
Giuseppe.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, this was an interesting process. I sit on the Impact Fee Committee, and things have been changing very rapidly in the world of municipalities and in our world. So it was a big and good learning curve for both us and the staff. And Craig, I have to thank Craig as well for sitting on those meetings, even if he's not part of the committee, but it was very helpful and educational. I think it's, as the city grows, it is almost a no-brainer to have the transportation, the impact on transportation being factored in the cost to the development.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous as well, Michelle. And we will stay with Michelle and move on to item 10A, which will be ordinance 22-16, an ordinance adding a new chapter, chapter 18, to Title II of Whitefish City Code to establish the Whitefish Sustainable Tourism Management Plan Standing Committee, and this will be on a first reading. Michelle.
Thank you. I would like to thank Craig for helping me out with the staff report. So the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan Steering Committee, also known as the STMP for short, was established in January 2018 and was to disband at the end of 2019 or upon adoption of the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan. On September 21st, 2020, the City Council adopted the plan and extended the term of the STMP until October 1st, 2021 to reassess and prioritize the action items outlined in the plan. A joint work session was held in June 2021 to discuss the following action items recommended by the STMP. One was to redefine short-term rentals from stays less than 30 days to stays less than 90 days. Two was to develop education and outreach materials in relation to the ballot initiative to extend the resort tax. And three was to provide a list available on the city website of licensed short-term rental properties and require the Whitefish business license to be included in all those rentals. On September 22nd, 2021, the committee held a meeting and determined more time was needed to successfully implement the action items presented. Council voted to extend the committee until October 1st, 2022. The Sustainable Tourism Management Plan lists 4 high-priority capacity-building actions. They are 1, education and outreach. The Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau will be the lead on this task and have allocated funds for this effort. Number 2 was a tourism standing committee to oversee the recommendations of the plan with a long-term goal of hiring a sustainability coordinator that will function to implement the Climate Action Plan as well as the STMP. Number 3 was a business survey to determine the level of support for initiatives and recommendations from the STMP. And number 4 was benchmarking and data collection. Benchmarking tools are used to evaluate planning policies and programs over time and keeping stakeholders engaged in the implementation process. The CVB will undertake this task. Along with that, the plan also lists 5 high-priority issue-oriented actions. 1 is short-term rentals, 2 is recycling, 3 is funding for programs such as transportation, lodging tax, infrastructure, community development and Main Street grants, public land access such as trails, state parks, and fishing access, recreation management on state land trusts, or state trust land, and housing programs. Number 4 was wildfire preparedness, and number 5 is transportation such as transit, bike, and pedestrian. On October 19th, 2022, the steering committee met and voted to recommend City Council extend the term of the STMP Standing Committee. The committee discussed that the success of the STMP will require a dedicated committee to monitor progress towards STMP goals, continue data collection, benchmarking, update plan priorities, and oversee the short-term work plan. The committee will be made up of 9 members, which would consist of 6 members at large who must be a city resident with experience in, knowledge of, or perspective on tourism, transportation, and nonprofit organization and its relationship to the Whitefish community. Up to 2 of those members at large may reside outside the city of Whitefish, as long as the member resides in Flathead County and has an ownership interest in or a managerial position at a business located or operating within the corporate limits of Whitefish. And then one of those members, also a member, would be from the Whitefish Mountain Resort, and 1 member from the CVB, and 1 member from either staff or council representative. The committee term will be for 2 years, and the committee shall meet quarterly or more often as needed. The members of STMP committee serve as staff or volunteers, and there are no financial requirements or impacts to the city associated with the extension of this term. Staff respectfully recommends council discuss the goals of the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan. Consideration shall be given to whether those goals warrant a dedicated committee or if they could be assigned to other standing committee and agencies. Again, I want to thank the STMP committees, which are Brian Schott, interim chair, Nick Columbus, Alan Davis, Megan Powell, Mariah Juice, Craig Workman, Andy Fury, Lauren Oskalaski, and advisors Dylan Boyle and Rhonda Fitzgerald. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Any questions for Michelle on this action item? Not seeing any. I'll entertain a motion, please. Andy.
I would go ahead and move that we approve its ordinance number 22 dash, which number
16.
are we at now? 17, correct?
16.
16. Oh yeah, 16. And that would be an ordinance adding a new chapter 18, title 2 of the Whitefish City Code to establish the Whitefish Sustainable Tourism Master Plan Standing Committee on a first reading.
Thank you, Andy. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Further discussion?
I guess I'll speak to it briefly as the council representative, and I wasn't at the last meeting, unfortunately, and I think that from the committee standpoint, for everybody I talked to, there was a general, yes, this is something we need to continue doing, probably a little less enthusiasm from Michelle and Craig possibly, but not signaling you guys out by any means, but I think, and I'm like everybody, it's not that we need more committees in this city, but this one doesn't take a ton of staff time, and I can't tell you exactly what it's going to do, and I think that's been something that Michelle and I have reported after most of our meetings that we've had, although I think we do get things done. But one thing I do like about it is I think it takes a little more holistic approach, and it brings a lot of different pieces together that we don't look at collectively a lot of times. We have climate action plan, and we have parking, and we have all these other things, and they all kind of operate in their own little realm. And I think the Sustainable Tourism Committee really does kind of take a look at the overall perspective for those things. And I think it brings together a group of people in the community that necessarily wouldn't always sit down together. And I think that's important too. So I wholly support it.
Thanks, Andy. Giuseppe.
Yes, I am just concerned about this recommendation that says staff respectfully recommends council to discuss the goals. And the fact that there might be a hint that some of these functions are already performed kind of sparse around the resources in the staff as well as in other committees. I hear a lot of names that are also in, for instance, a couple of names from the Whitefish Convention Visitor Bureau. And I wanted to confirm, is this an ordinance?
Correct.
So it requires a supermajority?
Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does fail on a 3-1 vote with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition. And I'd like to possibly hear from you at the end of the meeting as to why you cast your vote in that direction, if you don't mind. We'll move on to item 11A. You have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Got off easy tonight. Anything additional to report on, Dana?
I think just a reminder that tomorrow is election day. It's federal elections. We are going to be open. Usually we're closed on the state election days, but we are open tomorrow. We will not have a voter box, so you do have to return your voter ballots to the county.
Okay, thanks, Dana.
Oh, or the polling place, sorry.
Or
I
the
should
polling
clarify
place, okay.
that.
And you have a letter from Citizens for a Better Flathead under item 12 of our agenda concerning records request process with the city of Whitefish. Any comments on the letter or questions for staff? Not seeing any. We'll start with councilor comments, and why don't we start with Giuseppe tonight?
I'm okay, and I can address that question on the record.
If you don't mind, I'm just curious.
I'm okay, yeah. And I have followed a lot of work of the committees. I've attended almost all the meetings of the Whitefish Convention Visitor Bureau. I have attended only one or two of your meetings. I say yours because you are the council representative.
I don't recall you attending any, but that's all right.
Lauren Hoshilowski was instrumental in a lot of the activities that have been proposed and executed, and I think they've done a great job. At the same time, we had a plan, the council, before my time, had a plan to have the committee work within a certain time frame, and the fact that the staff points out the fact that maybe there are ways to do this without yet an additional committee and still visiting the staff. Nobody ever stops us to come to the city staff and talk about challenges and problems and concerns about tourism. I think it's better to simplify and focus on the priorities that are at hand. And I think we've done a great job with tourism, and the Whitefish Convention and Visitor Bureau is pretty much taking the lead on it. And for that reason, I voted against it.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Anything further this evening? Okay, thanks. Steve?
I just have a couple things. There was a typo in the, did you get that? Along instead of alone? Okay, thank you. And then just quickly, Craig, do you have any estimate on the tree damage and cost and all that stuff that we might be looking at for this last storm?
I don't have any estimate on costs. Maria and I did chat briefly earlier today about the situation, and we kind of have a plan between Parks and Rec and Public Works as to how we're dealing with the cleanup, and so we're moving forward with that. I can tell you that there's significant damage that was incurred to the city's urban forest. I think the biggest damage is likely to the smaller trees that were planted in the last 5 to 10 years where, you know, when that main stem snaps, the tree is pretty much unviable. So I think we're going to have some tree replacement that we need to talk about at some point. And so we'll be working potentially with our insurance company on possibly a claim for that based on Mother Nature. But we're working on cleanup. I think by the end of this week we'll have, you know, what's in the boulevard taken care of. What we're asking people that call in is if you have trees on private property that have sustained damage, please manage that yourselves. Anything in the boulevard that has fallen down, the city is picking up. Of course, you know, we have residents that aren't necessarily able to handle that themselves, and so as it comes out to the curb, we're taking care of it. But anybody that's able to manage, you know, tree branches and, you know, vegetative debris from private trees, please do so.
And residents cannot put those, we just got a thing about the leaves that we could put them by the front yard, but branches and stuff are not
Correct.
okay for that, right?
Right, yeah, we don't currently have a program or a policy on branch removal.
Okay, thank you. The last thing I just want to bring up tonight is that I do think it's time for us to consider revising our the amount of money we give back and how we give back money based on in property taxes based on our resort tax. And I'm not sure what the process is for looking at that. I just paid my taxes today, or half of my taxes for next year today. And I would like us to undertake at least an investigation into what we can do differently in order to give more back to the full-time residents rather than giving equally back to people who have second and third homes here. And I'm not sure what the process is for starting to look at that.
Dana, we've discussed this in past. Can you?
Yep. So state law would prohibit us from rebating resort tax collections to local residents versus second homeowners or those that aren't residing in their homes. It is actually clear in state law. While I know that the language could be read one way, our property tax system is directed by the state of Montana, so it would take legislation at the state level.
Okay, but is what we refund part of, it's lumped into the same, because we're not, it's not, the assessment's not different, it's what we give back that's different.
Right, so state law requires 5%, excuse me, requires a minimum of 5% property tax relief. It would have to go to all property taxpayers. To provide a property tax relief then above that for local residents, I don't know that we have a mechanism in place that we could do that.
Okay.
That would be probably the problem. And again, I think Angie has concerns about doing something like that as well.
Yeah, I guess, Steve, I'll jump in. Nathan actually asked me to look at that issue. And there are concerns about treating people differently based on their residency for the purposes of taxation, and that includes for like a refund of property taxes. I'm not saying we would get sued, but there are some equal protection problems there.
Okay. Other states do it. It happens in lots of other places. We wouldn't be the first ones taking a different look at this based on the overwhelming tourism and second home ownership that we have. Anyway, okay, well, I would still perhaps like to have a work session on it so that we have some better information about what we could and could not do.
Sure.
Would that be, I'd have to get approval from at least 2 other counselors, is that correct?
Yes. In favor of seeing this on a future work session agenda? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Other than that, please get out and vote if you haven't already done so. I'm the kind of person who likes to vote in person and wear my sticker proudly. So maybe I'll see you there in the morning.
Thank you, Steve. Ben?
Yeah, I wasn't going to make a comment, but I do now want to say something about this concept of the supermajority, because this has come up a couple times in not too distant council meetings. You know, I feel, as a matter of democracy, we're a council, we're a group, and we make decisions as a group. And I think when we have these situations up here that don't come along often, but they seem to come along sometimes, where a single person can reject something. I'm not saying you're wrong to vote against it. I think you should, let me finish. No, I understand, but I'm just saying, in general, it just doesn't feel like the proper democratic process that any single person up here can effectively veto anything. And so, I guess I don't know what the answer is, or if there is an answer, but it just doesn't, it feels like whenever that situation comes up and one person votes in opposition to something and kills it, I'm not sure that that's exactly what the citizens had in mind. And I'm not sure that the outcome is what the citizens have elected the body of folks here to do. So in general, I think if something like that happens, I think it could be considered that perhaps a fuller council should have an opportunity to weigh in on it, just as a matter of doing right by our citizens. So that's all.
Thanks, Ben. Did you have something to add, Andrew?
Yeah, I did actually. So that is actually, there are certain things by state law that you have to pass by supermajority. That is kind of a weird part of our code that actually was voted in however long ago. I don't know if there was a contentious council or what at that point. That's what tends to make me think that. You guys could always amend the code. And again, there's certain things by state law you guys are going to need to do by supermajority. So, I mean, that's something staff could take a look at. We could bring it back to you in a work session. But again, that's a unique area of our code. So, I mean, we can certainly take a look at it and we can bring it back to you and.
I would be in favor of that. I mean, in my opinion, if we have 4 council members and we pass something on a 3-to-1 vote and it fails, I don't think that's what we're trying to do here. So in my opinion, I think it can be considered to change that.
I'd like to look at that. Okay.
There's a very simple solution. As opposed to using it as a forum to pound on one's chest, the courteous thing to do by the person that's going to vote in opposition to be a contrarian would be to say to the maker of the motion, we don't have a full council. I am opposed to this. I'm going to vote against it. Would you like to withdraw your motion? That's a very simple solution, and I've seen that done in the past. So,
or postponement.
say, withdraw your motion. I'm going to vote against it. It will fail as a result of not having a supermajority. Let's reconsider with a full council.
Anything further tonight, Ben?
No.
Andy?
Nothing.
I don't really have anything other than I wanted to thank Public Works and whoever chipped in from staff, because I'm sure it was much more than just the Public Works Department that responded to the outages and the trees, damages, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to thank you, Craig, and your entire staff for stepping up. That was certainly a series of unique storms that I've never really seen in this town before. So appreciate it, and please extend that on to your entire staff if you don't mind.
And the fire department, they definitely
Fire
respond
as well.
moving
Thank
trees
you.
quite a bit. They were on all night.
And Flathead Electric went above and beyond. I know that there still are some customers or some members that are out of service, but that's not for lack of effort on the part of FEC, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Other than that, I just reviewing the goals list that Dana sent out with the packet, I believe, last week. We'd had discussions about holding a council retreat. And we didn't get anywhere. And I really think we need to prioritize this and get this back on the radar. I'm not advocating it to happen before the end of the year because I know everyone's busy with year-end business, holidays, et cetera, but I could just throw out a suggestion that maybe we shoot for some time in late January, and rather than doing an overnight out of town, because I know that's pretty difficult for some folks, maybe we can just organize a day retreat, and it may be more practical for folks to attend. Are you still interested in pursuing that option? Yes, Steve? Okay.
Yes.
I know it's probably too earlier to nail down potential dates, but why don't I get with Dana and we'll talk about a potential venue. Would the preference be to do that on a weekend? Okay. Andy, supportive? Yes. Okay, great. I think that's all I actually had. Anything further? Craig?
Yeah, quick comment. I just want to circle back to the Sustainable Tourism Management motion. I think I was pretty much the author of that recommendation in Michelle's staff report. And so the intention wasn't to railroad the committee. We really just wanted to hear a little bit of discussion from council on what the goals of the plan are and whether potentially it warrants the continuation of the committee. I think what I heard from Andy is more than enough. And I just want council to know that I don't think it's a tremendous burden on staff, and I wouldn't have a problem continuing on the committee. I don't know how you resurrect that, but just wanted to go on record letting you know.
Giuseppe, would you entertain lifting that off the consent agenda for at least a full council discussion at our next meeting as the lone vote?
I think I cannot touch it. I was thinking that who voted in the favor can lift it out. Am I correct?
Yeah, it won't be on the consent agenda, but I will have a motion for reconsideration.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It will not be on the consent agenda because it was voted down. And so we only move things to the consent agenda that were approved. So we would have to direct staff to re-put that on the agenda. And so I think that would be the appropriate thing is to have us bring it back today.
The motion said in first reading, doesn't that mean there was supposed to be a second reading?
Only if it's approved. Yeah.
Okay. Whoops.
Yeah,
Anyone who voted in the majority
in the majority, that's right, okay.
can simply move to reconsider.
Okay, great.
I think that's the way it works.
Then I am the only one and I was the majority, so can I move it to reconsider next time?
I think if you voted in the affirmative, you can lift it or for reconsideration. Correct, Andy?
Okay.
Not if you were the lone vote in opposition.
You were the lone person to kill it. You did not vote in the majority.
Yeah. So voting in the majority, whether it's approving it or not. That make sense? Okay. Dana, anything further from staff?
Not at this time, no. I think I'm good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.
Okay.